Righty. So again, welcome everyone. My name is Demetrius Washington. I'm president of the Dallas-Fort Worth chapter of National Black MBA Association. And we are very excited to have you here with us today for our second Grow with Google event. Today, we'll be talking about resumes and LinkedIn optimization, really how to elevate your digital brand. And we have some exciting, very expert speakers for you today. And so it's my absolute pleasure to have you join us for this session. We're gathered here to embark on a transformative journey towards enhancing our professional profiles. And throughout this event, we will delve into invaluable strategies to refine and elevate our resumes, empowering us to stand out in today's dynamic job market. As you know, it's a lot of competition out here. And we want to make sure that when you are applying for jobs or seeking your next career opportunity, you stand out from the rest of the crowd. So thank you for being here, and let's collectively embrace the knowledge and insights that will undoubtedly shape our careers. Excuse me. So we're going to move on to the agenda of what we're actually covering today. We'll go through job boards and pay transparency, a quick glance at resume evaluations, learning the 4 strategies to improve your resume, and resources. To help us navigate through the conversation today, we have one of our members, our board members, Tricia Vickers, who's also an HR expert. And then she will be introducing our keynote speaker for you today. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to you, Tricia.
Thank you. And just to touch on the agenda. So when we talk about job boards and pay transparency, we want to also start the conversation around applicant tracking systems. So as you all may know, and really start to kind of frame your mind to think about, these really are your first hurdles before getting your resume into the hands of recruiters. So we want to talk to you about some really nice strategies to help get your resume seen by more people on the back end. Okay, so then we'll go into the quick glance of resume evaluation activity and look at resumes, kind of do's and don'ts about how to format, most importantly, errors, and also really how you can make a really, really good first impression on the hiring manager. After that, we'll go into the 4 strategies that make any resume better, which is, again, formatting, really highlighting your skills and accomplishments, citing very specific examples and measurable details that really tell the story of how you have tailored your experience to craft a story and how you relate to the hiring manager's needs, and also how you're aligned to the job description. So for each strategy, our amazing keynote speaker, Jeremy, is going to really show you literally his resume. We're going to dive into the anatomy of Mr. Resume's resume here. We're going to practice making edits to it, and he'll share some digital tips that can help really the resume writing process easier for you. And really by the end of the session, we're hoping that you're able to craft your own resume, apply these strategies that have been laid out by Google. And just to kind of briefly touch on why the partnership exists. So if you think about Google, they operate the largest search engine that we know of, right? And so they sit on a variety of information, and they understand what queries are and what the answers are just based on listings that come up in those searches. So aside from monetizing that data and using analytics to really get their vision and products to customers for themselves and others, they've actually created a program that helps nonprofits like National Black MBA to educate our members on certain skills that will make them successful in their business and entrepreneurial pursuits, and also in the corporate workspace. So before I go in any further, just to tie us all together, last week we had a really in-depth conversation around professional branding, and now we're going to go into digital branding. So we have our brand defined, it's detailed, we have our story together, and now how do we articulate that with words and a visual presentation to achieve our goals? All right, and next slide, please. All right, so I want to ask you all, this is just honestly a question you can answer on your own to yourself. I want to, oh, hello? I think someone's off mute. But I want to ask you all to think about how many job boards do you use today? Is that number one? Do you just solely use LinkedIn? Is that number two, where you use LinkedIn and maybe sometimes Indeed? Are you quote unquote old school where you use monster.com? Do you also kind of use Career Builder, or kind of have gone into more of the new age job boards, which are more the ZipRecruiters and the Glassdoors that offer some detail that people may want to know about the job, right? So you can, I hope somebody said more than 5, but most people that I speak to, it's usually about 1 or 2. And I want to take you all on a journey and help you understand how many job boards exist today and why it is extremely important to go beyond 1, 2, and 5. There are over 10,000 job boards present today. So this plethora of platform caters to job seekers, but also employers, right? So LinkedIn is that very niche networking platform that allows you to really explore yourself, but it's very public. So there are a lot of job boards that are private, and they also relate very closely to their industry, okay? And I want you to understand the difference between a recruiter looking for you on LinkedIn versus Indeed versus Monster versus a website like dice.com. Okay, so we're all very familiar with LinkedIn.com. There are a variety of jobs posted there. A LinkedIn job posting costs about $300 a month to a recruiter. So 30 days of me promoting my job costs about $300. If I am a very large employer, I have 5,000 jobs. So all of my jobs will not make it to LinkedIn. I'm going to send the jobs that are the most difficult for me to fill, where I need to kind of change up the landscape, where I may have hired a lot of people, or it's the same position that I have all across the universe, and I have some attrition needs. So I want you all to understand that every single job that an employer has is not going to make it to LinkedIn. They're gonna be strategic about why those jobs end up there and how long they're up there for. So even if I fill the role internally, it may still be lingering around, right? So I want you to understand that it is important to really expand how many job boards that you do use if you want to become more aggressive about your search. So the second part of this is also really understanding niche job boards. So I'll use Dice for example before we go ahead and move on. So Dice is one of the largest job boards available for technologists. And other job boards exist for people who are in nursing, people who provide very niche services when it comes to sales. Okay, so you have a variety of different organizations that different skill sets that have job boards that cater to them, so they can have their niche clientele pay an even higher amount to post a job there. So back to LinkedIn, not only do I have to pay for the job, but I have to pay for my recruiter seat, my license to log into the portal, LinkedIn.com. That's about $600 a month per recruiter. So if you think about an organization having 1,000 recruiters, that's $600 per recruiter per month. Right. And so every organization, maybe smaller, mid-size, really doesn't have that financial capability to make expenses like that happen across the board. So they only give certain licenses to certain recruiters for a certain period of time. So I want you to all to really begin to think about how many different avenues there are for you to reach a job and for a job to reach you. And you can't just rely solely on LinkedIn. Okay. And that goes into my last point, which is pay transparency. Yes, perfect. So if you all are, some of you all may be aware, but there are pay transparency laws where in certain states, such as New York, New Jersey, California, and Colorado, that actually mandate that an employer has to not only post a job, but a salary range that they offer for that position. That has to be the actual salary range approved by compensation, right? So the reasoning behind that is because, in the past, candidates have gotten to the last step, and Muhammad, I'll get to your question. Candidates have gotten to the last step of the interview process, and then they're finally told what the actual compensation is for the role, what's been budgeted and approved, and it's so out of line with what they've been talking about this entire time. So it's been months of wasted energy and time. So along with the pay transparency laws, there's actually a growing instance of salary history bans. So in the process understanding how much a role pays, you have to understand that most employers are not allowed to ask you how much you are currently earning in your role. So they cannot ask you your current salary or salary history at any point in the interview or application process, even up into an offer. So you are allowed to tell them what you're earning, but I advise against it. Okay, you want to make sure that you're understanding what's offered for the role, because what Bank A pays for a position is going to be different than what Bank B pays for a position. That's the reason why the bands exist. It helps create healthy competition for the candidates to understand that these organizations are not in cahoots with each other, so they can be more transparent about what they offer and create more value, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just pause there. Mohammed, I'll go ahead and take your question.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, I know it's but first of all, I want to say that I'm mostly using LinkedIn and Indeed. These are the most two that I use. And but my question is like out of the point, but so is it recording like which channel? Like is it a YouTube channel or what exactly?
We're recording, so we will post this on YouTube, yes.
On which channel is it?
National Black MBA DFW.
Okay.
Okay. So if I'll pause and see if anyone has any questions around pay transparency before we go into our keynote speaker here. But again, I want to really bring home the importance of understanding that you are allowed to leverage information that's available to you for negotiating. Okay, so I want to two things. The good news is that pay transparency laws exist. The bad news is that Texas is not part of one of those states. But if you see a role that's posted for a large corporation, let's say Coca-Cola, right? They have an opening in Atlanta, but they have a similar opening in New York for the same role. Go to that New York posting, scroll to the bottom. It's going to say, it's going to provide a range or even a target number, what they're looking to hire for. That is a range that they are mandated to hire for. Some things to consider is that, they do calculate in cost of living in the area where the job is posted. So you can still arm yourself with healthy information about what a company pays, and that'll help you in the negotiation process. Well, I understand that this title pays this in New York. Let's take off 15% because I live in Georgia. Let's take another 2% because I live in Texas, and get to an understanding of, is this a role that I want to continue to pursue? Or, sweeten the pot and say, based on my skills, I meet the expectations of the role and also exceed those. So, is what you're posting the lower end or the middle part of the range, and help you understand what you can expect to earn in that role. Okay. So I want to go ahead and introduce our keynote speaker, and he's going to go into a lot of very, very, very helpful details when it comes to really crafting a very quality resume. Again, Google has provided us a lot of resources when it comes to the structure and the formatting. We have a member of our organization. We're going to just go ahead and call him Mr. Resume. He is going to be at our national conference this year, working at the Career Resource Lab, the Career Center Lab on the career fair floor, really helping our members on site navigate the career floor with a better quality resume, right? So Jeremy is the owner and chief resume writer at Articulate Your Value, a leading professional resume writing service. With over 800 satisfied clients since 2021, Jeremy has established himself as a trusted expert in crafting compelling resumes that showcase individuals' unique experiences and skills. He is an author and of the acclaimed #1 Do-It-Yourself Guide for Building a Winning Resume. His comprehensive guide empowers individuals to create resumes that stand out and effectively communicate their value to potential employers. Throughout his 16-year professional career, Jeremy has held senior leadership positions with renowned companies such as Republic Services, Walmart, Dow Chemical, Lockheed Martin, Chevron, and Union Pacific Railroad. His expertise spans diverse industries, and he successfully assisted professionals in various fields, including those at TikTok, Old Navy, AMD, Target, Home Depot, Ford, various federal agencies, and notable nonprofit organizations. So without further ado, I introduce Mr. Jeremy Hardiman.
I appreciate that introduction. And a lot of times when I tell people the various places I've worked, especially the HR folks, they kind of roll their eyes a little bit at me because they say you were a flight risk. Well, I definitely had an opportunity to work with a lot of great organizations. And I couldn't have drawn it up any more perfectly because through all those experiences, those cross-functional experiences that I was able to gain, I'm able to pour that into my clients now. And so I do want to give a huge shout out to Grow with Google, as well as my chapter, the DFW chapter of the National Black MBA Association, for inviting me this afternoon to be the speaker for this event. And as discussed, we'll talk about resumes. And so we'll dive into that. And we'd be remiss to not start in talking about applicant tracking systems. And so Tricia spoke to this briefly. However, we want to dive a little bit deeper into this topic because a lot of times I work with people and they say, you know, I'm applying for all these different roles. And it seems as if as soon as I'm hitting submit, I'm getting that automatic response that says they went with more qualified candidates. And so a lot of times what that is, more times than not, is an applicant tracking system. And, you know, upwards of 80 to 85% of medium to large organizations are leveraging these to assist with the job recruiting, job search process. You have to think about it. You know, when you have folks in HR, talent and acquisition, you know, there's transparency through LinkedIn as well. And some roles have upwards of 250 to 300 people that are applying. And so there has to be some sort of screening mechanism that helps those folks that are trying to get that to a manageable number. And a lot of times that's how an applicant tracking system is leveraged in terms of the job recruiting process. And so you may ask, okay, well, what does it do, right? Why is an applicant tracking system relevant? Well, it scans the resume, and a lot of times it's trying to determine if your resume aligns with what is being requested within the job description. And so your match rate pretty much will dictate, based on the other people that have applied, if you will move forward in terms of next steps in the process. And so different applicant tracking systems search for different things. So there is no one ATS. And Tricia spoke about the different job boards. One that's out there as well are federal roles here within the United States for federal jobs. And so they use USA Jobs, and that happens to be one of the most strenuous applicant tracking systems that you can encounter. And so different job boards, pardon me, they also have different applicant tracking systems that they use. And so my point in that is there is no one size fits all to the ATS. They look for different things based on how the parameters are set up. And so more times than not, they are searching for keywords, those relevant skills that may be included within your resume, also years of experience, you know, just different desired and required qualifications, it'll scan for that. And so again, with the ATS, there are some different tips that you can utilize and leverage to ensure that you give yourself the best opportunity to move forward in the process. And so some of those tips, first and foremost, sort of some of the do's and don'ts. So what you don't want to do is utilize fancy fonts, right? So having scripts, you want to keep the font type very fundamental, if you will, right? There's classic fonts that you can utilize. There's Arial, there's Calibri, there's Times New Roman. I know that's kind of a more traditional font. However, it does get the job done. You want to avoid including graphics within the resume, tables and columns. A lot of times, a quick check that you can do is to upload your resume into Google Documents. And so if you have columns, a lot of times that resume can fold like a book, right? And so now the words are on top of each other and it's very difficult to decipher what's there, or the formatting can be off. And so avoiding columns is definitely something to consider when you are formatting the resume. Text boxes, headers and footers, these are all things that can trigger an ATS and really boot you out of contention, because that system will say, okay, this isn't a resume, right? And we have to be mindful about applicant tracking systems and knowing that, you know, the 20 years ago, the gatekeeper was a person, but now it's a system. That person has feelings, emotions, you know, and they may be able to look at things and make some different determinations. But in terms of this system, It has none of that. And so it's looking for what it's looking for based on how everything was set up in terms of the user and how they plan to utilize the system to screen candidates. Another thing is the keywords, right? So these are things that we want to look to incorporate, right? And how to scan a job description for keywords is very important, because if you are going for a specific function, or let's just say you're switching functions, you were in finance and now you're going to sales, where there's going to be different skill requirements. And so you have to make sure that whatever transferable skills you have that are relatable to the function or the role that you're going to be pursuing, that you incorporate them where they make sense, right? And so you want to make sure that you're leveraging that. So one, you satisfy those system requirements. And so here's an example of a sales representative resume, right? And how to scan this particular job description. So it's very brief. And I know some job descriptions can be a bit lengthy. And as Tracy alluded to, they have other elements to it, including the page transparency. So there'll be some different things that are listed. But in terms of this particular example, this is a sales example. And so you can see the different things that are listed there. And so they highlighted sales cycle. And so I'm assuming that if you've been in sales, you've endured quite a few of those during the tenure of your career. Talks about negotiations, presentations. And so if you've done these things, it's important that you are capturing that within the body of your resume, or just the resume in general. Another thing it mentions including is action verbs. And so we'll speak to that once we get to the professional experience portion of the actual resume. And in terms of important terms from the job description, that's kind of what we just covered. And so just make sure that you're going through, you're paying attention to the job description. And so some may say, well, Jeremy, I haven't identified a role just yet, right? And so you plan to just put your resume on a job board and more or less kind of see what type of roles attract to you. And so in those particular instances, I still say make the focus geared towards a specific function if you can, or the type of role that you may be pursuing. And so then that way you can utilize those. There may be a template of a role that's out there that you can leverage to make sure that you're incorporating those keywords. And so, you know, I do see that we have some questions in the chat. I did want to stop there before transitioning to see if there were any questions related to the applicant tracking systems, you know, buzzwords, job descriptions.
Yes, we have a question from Lauren, and she says, when I upload a resume and then review and correct the extracted information in the application, will that information be scanned by the ATS, or is it the actual resume that I uploaded that will be scanned?
Yeah, so good question there. It is really just going to depend on the organization. But more times than not, I would play it safe. And so I do think that both of those things would be referenced. And so I would just say approach it from the standpoint that both would be utilized. But it's kind of difficult, and maybe Tracy, you could jump in here as well, especially from your experience and kind of speak to that. But from what I've seen, just making sure that you utilize both of those. You are, you know, putting everything from your resume and including it in the application, because you never know which one of those two may be referenced.
Yes, I will go on based on experience, it will be the resume that you uploaded at the time of the application. So that will be where your quote unquote screening score comes from. And I know that some people tend to ask, well, why am I asked to upload the resume and then type in information? So when you type that information in, that actually becomes your profile. So that's ultimately like your entity. Your resume follows you along with that. And of course, both of those things can change. I can log in and say I now work at Coca-Cola, and I want to add that ahead of my experience in my previous role. But essentially, those two things will follow the profile. But I would assume from what I've seen is that whatever version is on the application is on the profile when you apply is what the screening score is assigned to.
Looks like we had another question from Daryl. How much should a person depend on Google Job Analytics that displayed before applying?
I'll answer that one too. So similar to how LinkedIn, if you don't mind, Jeremy, similar to how LinkedIn will, when you click on a job and it says 284 people have applied for this role, do not be deceived. apply for the role. Number one, anyone can apply for any job on LinkedIn.com. That's number one. Number two, they're not actually counting how many people apply for the role if once you click the link, it takes you to the company's website. So if I'm looking at a job posted by Coca-Cola and I click on the apply now link and it takes me to Coca-Cola's website, LinkedIn actually has absolutely no idea how many people actually fully completed the application. The only accurate account is if that role is solely posted on LinkedIn and then they're doing the export of candidates into their own applicant tracking system. So if it's driving traffic to the corporate page, apply either way, but don't assume that number is correct.
Yeah, good feedback there. We had another question in terms of what's your take on AI apps for resume scores. I would say to reference those, I have utilized JobScan in the past to upload a job description and then more or less kind of compare using the resume that was revamped. And a lot of that information is good. It's pretty solid. Again, there's a lot of different references in terms of resources that you can utilize. And whichever ones are going to give you the best shot, I would definitely say to use them. Like I said, I've used some in the past, and I know that they've been beneficial in assisting my clients in getting past that initial screening phase. And so referencing those definitely would not hurt. Now, to build your entire resume, I would definitely focus on customizing that, and we'll talk about that more so later in the presentation to make it less objective and task-based, but definitely referencing those AI resources I think could be helpful for you.
Thank you. And I'll just take Michonne's question, then we'll go ahead to the next slide. So Michonne asked, Workday, she mentions that Workday platform asks very detailed specifics, including salary. So depending on where the job is posted at, if it falls out of the states with a pay transparency law, they can ask you what your previous salary history is. Well, I'm sorry, they can ask you that question, but you don't necessarily have to provide an accurate answer. So there are some platforms that are antiquated. You can kind of fight that fight and turn them into the DOL and whoever else wants to mandate that they've kind of fall in line with compliance. So if you want to kind of continue on, I would really honestly put what you think is a fair compensation for the role. I highly doubt a recruiter, and you all can correct me, I highly doubt a recruiter has asked you, to detail your salary history in the past very recently. I would say about 5 years ago, it became a really, really big no-no, and I've seen recruiters be let go because of that.
Right. The most I've seen is, what are your salary expectations? Mm-hmm. And so sometimes people will get that question, right, as opposed to asking somebody what they make, per se. So that's kind of what I'm seeing in the market right now. Rashid, we'll have a link to the website, my website at the end. I'll just respond to that. So all good questions there. Thanks, Patricia, for jumping in with some feedback as well. And so in terms of the resume, that's what we're here to talk about, right? What are 4 strategies to improve your resume? That's what we'll get to. So speaking to that, first and foremost, choosing a professional format. Secondly, highlighting your skills and accomplishments. And from there, tailoring your resume to the job description. That's what we more or less kind of alluded to in talking about the ATS and going through the example of the actual job description. And then cite specific examples, include those measurable impacts. I'll tell you, 85 to 90% of the resumes that I receive prior to working with clients, they read like a set of tasks or objectives. And so it's like you're submitting a job description. And so you want to also speak to your value creation, right? So my approach to resume writing, first and foremost, is to satisfy those system requirements. And then secondly, speak to the value that you add, right? And so in terms of for-profit organizations, you want to be able to speak to how you're affecting people, processes, and performance. And from there, ultimately, how that impacts the bottom line. You may say, okay, well, Jeremy, I'm not going to be working for a for-profit organization. I'm going nonprofit, or I'm going to have a federal role. Well, still, everything depends on your ability to affect those 3 Ps. And so including those results, including quantifiable information to accompany the actions within your resume, is always a good thing, because at some point we plan to get past the system and now talk to a person. And so the more we can add context, the better. All right, so choosing a professional format. So one of the things that, a lot of people ask is how should my resume look? So you can go with the more traditional, or you can leverage a creative approach. And so I'll speak to both, right? With the traditional, it's pretty straightforward. I always tell my clients, look, don't get too cute with the resume. You do want to make sure that you keep things pretty standard. Notice there aren't a lot of aesthetics in the traditional format. However, the content is what we want to serve as the actual aesthetic. In terms of the creative format, I often suggest or recommend that if you're going to submit a creative format, that you are providing this in person. Because again, you have to be very mindful of the various rules associated with applicant tracking systems. And so if you include columns, if you have a picture on your resume, if there are graphics, right? And sometimes you do want to more or less kind of flex your creative prowess, especially if you're applying for like a graphic designer role, right? So you want to begin to more or less kind of show that, but just be mindful that initially the main goal is to satisfy that system requirement to then move forward to the next step. And then at that point, once you've been invited to interview, now, you can begin to show your creative side, especially if that's going to be referenced in this next role that you are applying to. And so kind of back to the traditional format. So we'll talk about this later on as well, but this can be either produced in a functional format or reverse chronological. And so typically I reference the reverse chronological resumes to accurately tell your story and to keep a succinct timeline. For functional resumes, making sure that you incorporate those dates are very, very, very important. And so if you are going to be using that, just keep that in mind, because I've seen them many times in the past where, speaking of functional resumes, where there aren't any dates listed per se. And so you definitely want to make sure that you incorporate that when you're using a functional style resume. Okay, so what are the traits of a professional resume? So first and foremost, the first bullet point speaks to white space. And so what's meant by that is just making sure that you incorporate enough white space so everything is easily identifiable. My eyes go directly to what it is that I'm looking for within the resume. The last thing you want with a recruiter who's having to do this all day, every day, and look at hundreds of resumes on a daily basis is not being able to find what they're looking for. And so making sure you incorporate enough white space is very important. Make sure everything is readable. And as we stated, you want to have a consistent font type throughout the resume. Make sure your headings are clear, the appropriate font as well. Like I said, avoiding those scripts. And so all fundamental things, but sometimes you'll be pretty surprised on how much they are overlooked. And so just making sure you keep everything pretty standard, top to bottom, left to right, avoiding those columns and some of those initial things that we spoke to in terms of the best practices for the applicant tracking systems. And so now we'll just dive into, I'll divide the resume up into 3 sections, right? And but before I go into the actual introduction, it just dawned on me, one question I'm often asked too is, how long should my resume be? Should I have a 1-page resume, or should I have a 2-page resume, or beyond that? Well, as a rule of thumb, I would say do not go past 2 pages. And for those on the webinar that have less than 5 years, I would say try your best to keep it to a page or less. Now, there are different roles, especially those within USA Jobs or the federal roles, where you can have a 7-page resume. It can be very extensive. It's just really about knowing the various roles that you're applying to and what their rules are. And so, just paying attention to that is very important. But as a rule of thumb, I would say to not exceed 2 pages. If you get to the point where you have over 10 years in your career, I would definitely say a 2nd page of real estate is warranted. But again, just trying to keep everything within that 2-page framework is something that I would strive for. So in terms of the heading, everything starts with the name. Typically, this is going to be the largest font size on the resume. I usually go from 16 to 22 in terms of the name, and I like to bold it, just my personal preference. And so the next line would be your contact information. I only include the city and the state. I don't think that there's a reason to have your entire address on a resume anymore, because more times than not, and Tricia can speak to this as well, when a HR rep or talent and acquisition partner reaches out to you, they're going to touch base either by phone or they're going to send you an email. And so including the entire address isn't necessarily required. And sometimes I've gotten the question, well, do I need that at all? Do I need my city of residence in my state? Well, it just depends. If you're applying for a role that's going to be out of state and requires you to relocate, then I think it's important that you let the folks know up front that relocation may have to be involved in the compensation package. And so having that there isn't a bad thing. Obviously, we want to have a phone number to a phone that we answer. And we want to have a professional voicemail set up as well. We also want to have a professional email address. And then from there, in terms of the links to the social platforms, I would say just as a general rule to go with the more professional platform, and more times than not, that's going to be LinkedIn. Now, I do understand there are folks that work in different fields. Again, we talked about individuals that are graphic designers, right? You may want to have a link to your, Instagram profile, because that's where a lot of your work may be. But just keep in mind that whatever you're sharing, that's what people are going to see. So just use your own discretion. But again, for me, typically, I only more or less kind of lean on putting the LinkedIn profile link on the resume. You'll probably notice that next line where it says target role. Well, with applicant tracking systems, some of them can be a little tricky, where they may look for the actual job title within your resume. And you're thinking, okay, well, I haven't had this job, so why would that be within my resume? Right? Why would that be listed? And so it's important to just, kind of track it there, and you can include it, simple check and balance, by having the target role and then stating the role that you are going to be applying to. The next section is the executive summary or professional summary, however you want to reference it. Sometimes people include an objective statement. Now, in terms of the objective statement, I do think that it's important to include it if you are going to be placing your resume on a job board and not necessarily applying for a specific position. However, you do want to make it as robust as possible, and you want to be pretty direct in terms of what it is or the type of role that maybe you are pursuing. I don't include the objective statement for my clients, especially in roles that they're going to be applying to directly, because the objective statement can be somewhat of a approach that's a little bit older in terms of usage. But with the executive summary, it's a great way to create some sort of intrigue and really kick off the resume. And with the executive summary, you don't want to be too extensive. I've seen it to where it's upwards of half a page, right? We don't want to start the resume off with a novel. However, a strong 2 to 3 sentences that really creates some intrigue and psychologically begins to set the tone on how somebody will approach your credentials is our objective with the summary. Also, you'll notice in this particular example, I've included like some immediate bullet points. Sometimes within the overall body of the resume, we may not necessarily speak to certain qualifications that may be included within the job description. And so this is an opportunity for us to put this in our own words and speak to it, right? And so the purpose of both of these sections, the executive summary and the signature skills and competencies, is, again, one, to kick off the resume, create that intrigue, but then also continue to satisfy those system requirements. And so this is another way that you can do that, is by incorporating some of those elements within the job descriptions in both of these sections. So then from there, right, we have the skills and the competencies section. This is pretty direct, pretty straightforward. If you are going to speak to a lot of these particular skills within the resume, there's no reason to be redundant. However, if you're not, and you see the job description and they more or less kind of include these things, it's okay to include it within this particular section. The important thing is to make sure that it is an attribute or proficiency that you do have, right? Because obviously you can include them to satisfy those system requirements, but at some point you will be asked, about these particular competencies. So making sure you keep the integrity there is very important. And you'll notice in this section, it may seem as though those are columns. However, those are lines. I just tabbed over and centered the section and more or less just kind of kept it standard from that standpoint. I didn't want to confuse you all and make you think that those were columns that were utilized. Those are lines that are more or less kind of tabbed over. And then in terms of the number of skills and competencies, I say keep it at 9 to 12 if possible. I do have those clients where they're like, no, I need at least 3 more based on my skills and abilities. And so just as a rule of thumb, I would say keep it at about 9 to 12 in that section. Question in the chat. I've seen resumes where people put MBA, PMP after their names. Any thoughts on that? That's fine. To go ahead and speak to some of your credentials, that's more than okay. I work with clients and I've incorporated that for them as well. Because if you are going to be applying for a project manager role, it's pretty, I think, straightforward in terms of adding that by your name. It begins to state outright that, hey, I possess that particular attribute and I am certified. So good question there, Nini. All right, so getting to the thick of things, right? Getting to the professional experience. And so in this particular section, there's a couple of important things to pay attention to. First and foremost, the heading, right? And in the heading, you obviously want to list the name of the organization, your title, and then also the location, right? And if this is a location that's out of the country, obviously we want to state that as well. And then in terms of the actual date formatting, you want to make sure that you incorporate that as well. I typically tell people to go month/year to month/year. And if it's in your present role, month/year through present. Again, when we're playing the ATS game, if you will, a lot of those systems are structured to read the date a certain way. And I have worked with clients in the past that I believe they were running into an issue because they went from year to year in terms of their experiences, where the various systems that they were probably encountering were telling them to list the month and the year. And so you may say, well, I have some gaps in employment. Well, I was speaking with a client today, and people have career breaks, and it's okay to speak about that. A career sabbatical is nothing to be ashamed of because they happen for different reasons. And so incorporating that and speaking to that within that time frame, whether it be, staying at home and being a stay-at-home parent, or having to help a ill family member. All of those things are important to capture within the resume as well, if you want to include that. It isn't required, but I just want people to know in terms of different time frames when you may not have been employed, it's okay to incorporate that within the resume. And so in terms of the actual bullet points, one of the things that was mentioned in the earlier slide was about action verbs. And so typically in terms of the actual bullet points, you want to do that. So if you look at the example on the screen and you see championed, led, developed, oversaw, all of these are action verbs. And if you do a quick Google search, there's a lot of different links that will come up. I know one in particular will give you over 185 action verbs, and it gives you different ways in which you can use those action verbs within the body of your resume. And so that's definitely something that you want to track and try to incorporate as well. But in terms of the actual achievements and bullet points themselves, you want to speak to the improvements you made. Processes you've developed, processes that you've improved, goals that you've obtained, and quantify your experiences as much as you can. Again, just remember those quantifiable elements of the resume break up the monotony of just words, right? So now it takes my eyes in a different direction, and I'm beginning to pay attention to this, because now I'm beginning to see the context associated with your various achievements. But again, think action, think result, right? Because if you're just including action, again, that's the more objective and the more task-based resume. And we always want to make sure that we're speaking to your value creation. Another part that you may want to include or vet out separately and at a different part of the resume are awards and recognitions. It's always good to speak to your accomplishments in that manner. If you were in sales and you were in the President's Club for exceeding sales of 1 million annually, it's okay to speak to that, right? That's what this is about. It's about marketing you. And so in doing that, we are speaking to the achievements and your overall progress in terms of how you've been able to support the organization. One thing that I wanted to show as well, because I'm often asked, well, Jeremy, I've worked at a lot of different companies, but in my current role, I've had multiple roles. And so how do I format that within the resume? Pretty simple. And so you can create an overarching kind of heading, if you will, speaking to the actual company, and then maybe the location. Obviously, you want to include your tenure from start to finish or start to now for your entire time. But then within that, just begin to have subheadings, right? And speaking to the various roles and keep them in reverse chronological order if possible. And so again, pretty straightforward approach with that. Another question that I often will receive is, how many bullet points should I have, for the role? And I'm going to tell you that depends, right? I try not to be excessive, but then we also have to be mindful of the 2-page requirement, right? And so we're speaking extensively, things can get crowded rather quickly. So, just being mindful of what's relevant and what the job description is telling me. Because in terms of what the role is requiring, that's pretty much going to dictate how I'm tailoring my resume. But if I'm just enhancing what I have to improve my overall appeal and my marketability, then I would say, per section, especially as it pertains to time with one company, try not to go over 5 or 6 if possible. But again, just being mindful that we want to keep everything as clear and concise as possible. So any questions about the professional experience section? All right. So the final section of the resume is going to be your conclusion, the ending, right? And in terms of the education, if you are a recent college graduate, I often suggest moving the education up towards the top of the resume, maybe just below the signature skills and competencies section, right? Because a lot of your experience may be related to your academic career at that point. And so, enlisting your major, your university, you also want to include relevant coursework. And so especially those things that are going to be applicable to the job that you're applying to, because now it does state that theoretically you have a base, but then also what we're doing is satisfying those system requirements for potential things that may be listed within the job description. Also, if you are a recent college graduate, including your GPA is a good thing. However, if you have less than a 3.0, I would definitely refrain from adding that. However, if you have over 3.0, definitely look to include it. Now, to my more experienced hires, the veterans, if you will, you want to, I would say, to pull the education section, towards the end, or at least after the professional experiences. The education obviously is important, right? And if certain degrees are required, then they're going to be asked about. However, it isn't as important for you because you have more of the practical experience, right? And so just kind of speaking to those things would be key in terms of placement of the education section. Also within the end of the resume are, certifications that you may have. I would say to only include those active certifications. Obviously, you want to list what the certification is and then also the certifying organization. any distinctions. We spoke about awards and recognitions. And so it's always good to include that. You may want to vet that out separately, right? And so this would be a great place to do it just after those certifications, and any professional affiliations, any, you know, organizational involvement. If you belong to any boards, this is always something good to include within the resume as well, because a lot of times it's considered, right? Any community involvement that you may have, you got to think about it. Most corporate organizations have corporate social responsibilities. And so they're doing things in the community as well. And so your ability to show that you're doing that independently and doing it on your own definitely shows that you are, you know, the fit for this position outside of what you do professionally. You know, you do things personally as well. And so, you know, we had Demetrius on, you know, kind of kicking things off. D is over, he's the president of the DFW MBA chapter. And so in his particular case, there may be some additional information that he wants to provide about being the president of, you know, the local chapter and what that entails, because a lot of this is outside of your day-to-day. This isn't what you do full time. And so to show that you are making time to get involved in other organizations that are doing things and making a difference in the community, it's important to expound upon that. But, you know, in terms of that particular section, I wouldn't be too excessive in, you know, creating another resume section, if you will, but definitely just kind of highlighting some of those key things that you and your organization has been able to achieve.
Thank you. And Jeremy, just to also point out before I present a question that Latoya has. So I want you all to think about diverse initiatives, diverse hiring initiatives. So organizations do not really have a problem getting applicants to their websites. They have a problem getting diverse applicants to their website, and they get they want to try to seek those candidates out. And so we can't necessarily go to your LinkedIn profile and says, oh, well, such and such has a tan, they have to be African-American, or, you know, they look Latino or Latina, or they identify as this and that. We can't make those assumptions anymore. That is literally racial profiling, and that is really how a lot of organizations fail audits. When you think about large organizations, most of them do business with the federal government in ways that you have no idea, right? So we are actually in the US, part of North America, we have to follow EEOC guidelines and affirmative action, as long as they decide to keep it around, right? So we do have to articulate our hiring practices, and also where do our diverse candidates get lost in our application funnel. So one thing you do need to consider is when you are listing organizations, make sure you spell those diverse organizations out fully, like Alpha Kappa Alpha, sorority, comma, INC period. Those matter, because we say, we can't say Tricia Vickers is a Black female, but I know that she is a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and she attended HBCU Florida A&M, right? So just think about those things as diverse indicators if you are okay with identifying those types of organizations in your profile, because they are used as search terms for recruiters. We do go after organizations that we know target or identify their members as diverse.
Yep. And so we had a question from Rashid. He was asking, he's taking the TRIM exam soon and getting that particular certification. If you're in the process of achieving that and gaining that certification, I would definitely mention it and state the expected certification date. And so it's definitely okay to include that, and you want to include the certification for sure, because if you're applying for HR positions, I know that is coveted. And so including that would definitely be beneficial for you. Latoya asked, I know that you didn't list the years for education. Is that recommended for us veterans? Well, thank you for your service, first and foremost. But in terms of the years, it really just depends. Like for the more seasoned clients that I work with, typically I don't necessarily include the year in which the degree was received unless it supports a gap in employment. So if you were getting your MBA or your undergraduate degree, whatever degree you were pursuing, then at that particular point, I would include the years associated with them. But it's not a bad thing if you don't include it, for sure. So it's not going to hurt anything at all. Just, you know, kind of personal preference at that particular point. We have a few more questions. Let's see here. I see you'll tell you. Okay. With my most recent education being in a completely different field than my work experience, should I move that above or below my professional experience as I'm looking to move into a new field? Well, it just depends. Most people start out wanting to do one thing and then they do something completely different. And so the important thing to remember is that most skills are transferable, regardless of even if that's in your education or not. It's not going to hurt you because in terms of the actual degree, now there may be preferences within a job description where they say they're looking for people that have a degree in this field, or this field. And so in those particular instances, there's nothing that you can do because unless you have a minor, you can't necessarily go back and change what you received your degree in. And so I don't think that there's a reason to more or less kind of move it in that instance. But really good question here. I would keep it is my response. I would keep it where it is. We have a couple more questions before moving forward, because we will have a Q&A at the end as well. And so I'll get to more of your questions there. What are your thoughts on a 2-page resume? Is there any point in your career where 2 pages is acceptable? And we spoke to that. I think that 2-page resumes are okay. Again, for those individuals with more extensive experience. If you have less than 5 years, even 7, right? Try to keep it to a page, but as you begin to get more experience, it's difficult to not speak to some of those things. Those earlier career experiences may not be as relevant, but again, that's going to depend on the role that you're applying to. And so going over onto that 2nd page is not a bad thing, in my opinion. Right. And some people will tell you, you know, there's a hard no on going to a page 2. Well, I'm not one of those people. And so leveraging that 2nd page is more than okay. And then here, is there a downside to having too many certifications? I think in terms of certifications and the ones that you list, they need to be relevant to the role, right? Because you can go on a tangent listing the different certifications that you have. But if they aren't relevant, then, you know, including those, I don't think is the best course of action to take. And so any certifications that you have that are related to the job, like Rashid mentioned, getting the SHRM certification, and maybe he's applying for HR roles, then you definitely want to include that. If you're going to be taking a role that's continuous improvement, maybe you want to speak to your Lean Six Sigma certifications. And so, you know, deciphering what's important in terms of those certifications is definitely key. But if all fails, follow the job description, see what it is that they're looking for. All right, so we've been moving quite along, especially in the chat. I had a question for you because now we're getting to wrapping up and going through our checklist and proofing the resume. So if I asked you a question, what percentage of resumes submitted for jobs contain a spelling or grammar error? What would you say? What percentage of resumes submitted for jobs contain some sort of spelling and or grammatical error? Y'all are hopping in. All right, doesn't look like we have much faith in people's ability to spell or be grammatically correct. All right, they're coming in. I see a lot of 80%, 65, 25. Erica, she's more on the positive side of things. 40%. Daryl said 100%. Well, hopefully there's some faith out there that some people are getting that portion of it right. But if you said close to 60%, then you were accurate based on my research in this particular area. So it's definitely important to make sure that you go through and you proofread and you double down and check for those spelling and grammatical errors, right? Because in a competitive job market like it is now, a few years ago, it was more of an employees market. I can say in terms of what I'm saying is shifting to the employer. People kind of have their picks. And so you don't want to have something like a misspelled word take you out of contention for a role. You know, it may get past that system, but if a person sees it and they're really paying attention, that could definitely, you know, strike somebody to say, nope, I'm going to take this resume out. So making sure that you proofread and go through and double check the resume after you completed it is very important. And so that leads to the checklist, right? And as I stated, proofreading, there's a lot of different ways to do that. I'm talking through a microphone now, right? Sometimes I just have to hear myself talk out the resume and read it, because at that particular point, I can catch a lot of the mistakes that maybe I have made. Also, identifying a circle of trust, right? 2 to 3 people that you are close to, that are going to take the time to actually go through your resume and provide you some constructive criticism. I always say, if it doesn't apply, let it fly. But if it does, look to incorporate some of those changes, especially if they're consistent and they're saying the same things. Another thing for me in terms of proofreading, I like to look at things on different devices in different ways. And so a lot of times my eyes can get fixated and I can't see certain things when I'm looking at a Microsoft Word document. And so it's important to switch it, save it as a PDF and read it as a PDF. Read the document on your phone, send it to your email as another way to save it for one, but then open it on your phone and read the resume on your phone. Read it on your laptop, read it on your tablet. A lot of times, again, the eye can be trained really, really easily. And so it's important to make sure that you're utilizing those different mediums to just kind of change things up a little bit, to make sure that you aren't reading things the same each time. Obviously, you want to hit that spell check, hit that grammatical error check, and then a good way to really check yourself is to upload your resume into Google Docs. The thing about Google Docs, right, and with spelling and grammatical checks through Microsoft Word, a lot of times, if you spell the word right, it's okay, but word usage isn't always caught. And so through Google Docs, it'll correct you. I was looking at a resume the other day and I meant to type painting and I had painting. Well, painting isn't a misspelled word, but leaving out that T, Google Docs is like, wait, didn't you mean painting? So it understood what I was talking about in terms of the actual thought that I was looking to complete. And so pulling over into Google Docs is a good thing. I will tell you, don't be scared away by how the spacing may be, because sometimes Google Doc doesn't pull the spacing over properly as it pertains to how you originally placed everything within the Microsoft Word document or whatever format you're leveraging. But again, Google Docs is another great self-check. Also, as mentioned early on, you want to make sure the alignment and the spacing is consistent. Checking your font size and type. Making sure that the font size and type are consistent as well. And then saving your documents. Typically, I say go with a Microsoft Word or Docs, DOCX, or a PDF. Pay attention to the job description in the application when you're applying. They'll tell you what type of format to upload your resume in. I know a lot of my folks out there, my clients that have Macs, they'll send me their resume and I'm like, I cannot open this, right? And so it's just being mindful of that as well when you're going through the process of the preferred format that the resume or any supporting documents is requested to be in. And then lastly, repeat steps 1 through 6. Go back through, because I guarantee you more times than not, when you go back to the resume, there's something that you'll catch when you've put it down for a couple of days and you go back to it. And so again, just make sure that you're doing this, and then always make sure that you save your changes to the resume, because the last thing you want to do is lose it. I get so paranoid that before I leave the house, if I'm working on a client, I'll take a picture of it just in case something happens to my jump drive or to my computer. I can go back in and type this, because I work way too hard to put the resumes together. All right, so as a quick review, the things that we discussed were choosing a professional format, trying to achieve balance so your resume doesn't look too crowded, right? We want to make sure that we create that clean look, that conciseness, and just avoid the resume getting a little too busy. Again, highlighting your skills and accomplishments. Obviously, we're marketing you, so make sure you include those things. Citing specific examples and those measurable details. We talked about quantifying, breaking up the monotony of words, including those measurable impacts, talking to the processes that you've improved and how they've impacted the organization. And then lastly, tailoring your resume to the job description. That's another thing that's going to be important. We talked about that in the onset, and identifying those keywords and making sure that we're aligning with what the job description is searching for. And so with that said, that'll conclude the resume portion. We will have a Q&A after the LinkedIn optimization section, but I'm going to hand it back over to Tricia.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Again, this is why we call him Mr. Resume. I've been in HR for 9 years, and he's been a member for a while. And what he didn't get to tell you all is that he went to one of our conferences and walked away with multiple offers same day from just really working the floor, but also just having a plan, having interviews scheduled before he got there. So really just having a thoughtful interactions with people, but also being prepared for a variety of conversations. So we wanted to really start to talk about the LinkedIn optimization part of this program, because a lot of the times when you do apply for a role, 9 times out of 10, the recruiters actually go to your LinkedIn profile to really match up what they're seeing on the resume to what you are publicizing to the rest of the internet. They're going to look at who your connections are, that they share any connections with you. They're going to look at your university. They're going to try to figure out, if you don't have a year on your resume, do you have them on the LinkedIn profile? Because sometimes they think that if you don't put 4 years, you actually didn't finish. So I want y'all to say that having a consistent LinkedIn profile with your resume, not word for word necessarily. Sometimes you don't really prefer to copy and paste because some things are confidential to the company, but you do want to understand that recruiters actively go to your LinkedIn profile just to understand who you are. They also look at what skills you have listed and aligned to your profile. They take a look at your posts and what you're liking. So if you're liking things about war, Donald Trump, Alabama, just be very mindful, because that metadata sits at the top of your profile. Activity is what's most important. So LinkedIn is in the business. So let's put it like this. The reason why LinkedIn is free to you is because you are the product. You are what's on the shelf, and employers like my company and every other one is coming to shop for you. So we pay for the opportunity to connect with you, and they want it. So out of the 7 million or 100 million promos that they do have, they want to be able to articulate who is the most active. So if you're liking things, you're liking current events, you're sharing your skills, you're sharing your thoughts, we understand that you are actively involving your network, you're engaged, you're a thought leader, and you're looking to make something happen. Whether you want to just stay connected or you're making a move, you are looking to make something happen. On the flip side of that, once a recruiter logs into the LinkedIn recruiter side of their license, the search results, you can actually say, do I want candidates who are recently active to show up first? They're gonna show if they are open to work. I can click a button that says show me the candidates that are open to work first on top of my search results. So you have to really think about how all those different features are monetized in the back end to drive up how much they get to charge employers to connect with job seekers. Okay. All right. So let's try to get everybody's LinkedIn profile popping. Let's start with the first thing. The first thing is the picture. All right. So I have seen an increase in people not wanting to post a picture. So, I will promote the fact that it is best to have a picture, but also to have a really good picture. So these days you don't have to, get your makeup done, get your hair done, get a $65 haircut. You actually can load some quasi-professional pictures and some selfies into different AI portals. And for like $9 or $10, they actually will create you anywhere from 50 to 100 images. Some of them are not going to be good. Your eyes are going to be up here, but I've actually used a LinkedIn, a website to create a headshot for me. And I got like 6 amazing shots out of it. So, have one, but also have a good picture. All right. So just so you understand, sometimes when you are not connected to a person, you actually can't see their picture. So if Jeremy and I are not connected, there's a way for me to hide my picture from him. And once you are connected, once I accept the connection, he is able to see my face. All right. So
yeah,
headline.
another thing also is that other than using AI for making you a picture, you can also use the portrait mode on the iPhone. It's in the option in the camera, which is really cool.
I did not know that. I didn't know that.
Really,
I appreciate
it's
that.
the portrait mode, which makes like what's behind you, like for example, dark or light.
Mm-hmm.
It can like blur what surrounds you.
Mm-hmm.
It's really cool.
It is. And when you think about that, you know, I've seen people with a nice business suit on in a car with the seatbelt right across their chest and, you know, I-30 behind them. So we appreciate the effort, but when you want to start to really optimize your profile, you do want a picture that says, hey, I'm ready for business. I'm not just getting to work, snap the picture, decide to take it and post it. I'm not rushing to get somewhere. I am ready to work. That your image should say that when they look at your profile. Another important thing is your headline. Do not, you know, create this very, very, very long headline. It's limited to 120 characters. If I were you, I would limit adding special characters. So don't add the PMP with the little trademark symbol behind that. Don't add it to there, don't add it to your LinkedIn URL. So those things just don't show up correctly under search results. So it might push you to the bottom when it's pushing someone else to the top over you. Your professional summary is your elevator pitch. So this is your first person narrative, and you basically describe who you are and how you can help another person or another organization. When I talk about a LinkedIn link, so, you know, LinkedIn assigns your profile, linkedin.com/TBV, all these characters. You can actually curate that backslash as if it's your, you know, your Twitter handle, right? So you can create a special branded, I guess, title there for you. So a lot of the good ones are taken. I have to admit, LinkedIn has been around for 13, 14 plus years. So the great ones are taken. But if you do want to make sure your LinkedIn profile is kind of easily to find, you can shorten that and actually make it your name, but it does not automatically populate to just being your name when you first create the profile. I want to quickly talk about work experience. Again, consistently having your work experience on your resume and on your LinkedIn profile is important. Sometimes recruiters don't want to present a candidate because they're not sure, they don't feel confident that the person is, you know, in the role as long as they said they were, or there may be information missing or it has been updated. So if I see one thing on the resume and I see it on LinkedIn, I'm up in the air. And then again, candidates who have optimized their profile are going to come top of the mind and again, be the candidates that I want to present to my hiring leader first, right? So when you're typing in your company into your LinkedIn profile, it's going to start to auto-populate and try to finish your sentence. Let it do that. What it's trying to do is align the company that you work for to your company's actual LinkedIn page. So unfortunately, when you look for me, I might start typing in JP Morgan. My coworker might have JPMC, JP Morgan Chase, JP Morgan Chase and Co, JP Morgan Associates, Advisors, JP Morgan Japan. So that creates all these subsequent different company pages. But JP Morgan has to basically get this blue check mark and identify which page this company that this profile is aligned to, and just to kind of add some more color on what that looks like. So if I'm a recruiter and I don't have LinkedIn recruiter access, I want to just go to a company's webpage who I know always has great candidates. I want to search for any candidate working in their PMO office. So give me a PMO project manager at Coca-Cola. I'm going to type that into the company page under people, and the best results are going to show up top first. And if your company, if your work experience company selected doesn't align to that particular page, you won't show up, believe it or not. So again, these are these are different strategies to think about, but I want you to understand that when we digitize things, we codify it. So it is very particular and very technical. And that's how they get to enable all of these features to say, hey, Tricia, I know you paid $8,000 for this recruiter's license. I want $10,000 more so I can tell you how many people work at JP Morgan, what do they all do, right? So, there are different things happen there. So you want to make sure your skills are listed and mapped to an actual keyword that they recommend. And some other things to consider similar to your resume are the volunteer roles and nonprofit organizations, any honors and awards. Publications are amazing to post. If you've been featured in anything, you want to actually create, add the URL, add the publishing, or you want to add your link to your patent or your patent number. Those are amazing to have, but I can't say that at the top of the list is certifications. certs. Okay, that helps us know that you meet the minimum qualifications for a role, but you also exceed some others in the candidate pool who may have already applied. All right, so I want to kind of pause there. I know we're getting close to time. Did anybody have any questions around, like LinkedIn and kind of creating a full profile? Okay, so Daryl asked, how similar should a LinkedIn page be? So you want to be careful about how much detail you expose about your current role. A lot of things, we don't really, police people in our company and say you can't really be out here telling people how large our company is and, what systems we're using, but people do it. I've seen it bite people in the butt in risk, compliance, governance, and audit roles. Those are the people who attest to a lot of different policies within a company that they're not sharing confidential information. So again, you want to be as elaborate as you want to, because you're submitting your resume to a particular job for a particular employer. You're not necessarily sharing this information publicly. So I would definitely just kind of consider how much would you want to share with the world, because anyone can see your LinkedIn profile.
All right, and I was going to add there too, Daryl, and making sure that things are integrated and it follows the same timeline. And so making sure that that resume aligns with what's on the LinkedIn profile, because not for nothing, it's a soft background check. And so I can go there and really, kind of gauge things and see who you are. And you made a really good point, Tricia, about including links to different articles and things that you've been involved in, because those can serve as work samples as well. And LinkedIn is a safe place to go check, as opposed to within the resume, including hyperlinks, for cybersecurity reasons, people won't click on it. But if I can see that on your LinkedIn profile, it is somewhat of a safe place. But a really good point there with regards to what's shared. That's really going to depend. And I typically tell people, if you work for a for-profit organization, chances are, if you're talking about the finance, they post a 10K and a 10Q. And so that information is provided on a regular. And so the way you've contributed to that, you can take that in consideration. But for the most part, if you know that it's information that can't be disclosed, then I would avoid including that.
And Nina has a question. I know you and I have spoken about this before that you may want to dive into.
Gotcha. In my career, the question is, in my career, I've had 2 different focuses and I have 2 different resumes. How do I articulate this on my LinkedIn profile? And so in terms of that, you're still more or less just kind of listing things in reverse chronological order on your LinkedIn profile, because it is looking for those dates that things were done. And so everything is more or less kind of there. And in terms of, how somebody views it, it's really just going to depend, because Tricia spoke to different LinkedIn projects that she's been a part of, and making sure that you incorporate that is very important, within the LinkedIn profile. But having everything there in terms of the 2 different lives that you lived in terms of your career, that's okay. And so, just spending some time there, condensing it so that it isn't, excessive will be key. So just really focusing in on those key accomplishments and highlights that you've had in terms of both functions that you work, that would be the suggestion that I would provide.
Sure. And some people don't necessarily want to say that they're open to work and have that green circle kind of follow their profile. A new feature similar to what someone mentioned in the iPhone. So LinkedIn now, if you want to create a post and just talk about anything you want to talk about, an upcoming event or experience, or sharing a moment, they actually have an AI feature built in. So similar to ChatGPT, once you start that, it allows you to enable that feature. So you can say, here's what I want to say, fix it to make it great, help me with the punctuality, the punctuation, the grammar. They'll then analyze what you're attempting to say and create it for you. You have the opportunity to repost that and edit it as well. I would start practicing using that for statements where you're articulating moments between your older experience and your more recent experience, and how you maybe tie us together. Basically my experience of 12 years of entrepreneurship has led me to have a better understanding of project management and XYZ. And I'm so glad that I finished these certifications related to brag on yourself. You use an AI tool to help you brag on yourself, to help people kind of color in those gaps. It'll also populate hashtags. People can follow hashtags on LinkedIn, and there's a website called hashtagifyme.com. I'll type it in there, and it'll actually show you what are the top hashtags that people follow. So those could be other LinkedIn members, those could be job seekers, or they can be employers who want to start to tie in and not look at all the mess of what's said on LinkedIn, but start to kind of figure out what industries, what people, you know, am I following ESG and environmental sustainability? Am I following certain types of investment? Am I, you know, following DEI efforts? So you can actually follow hashtags, but you can also use those hashtags to show up in front of those 41 million people who follow it.
Right.
So I'll just pause there for any questions and turn it back over to Jeremy if you want to share any last thoughts.
For the most part, you know, it's kind of a mesh, you know, in terms of the resume and the LinkedIn profile, which you've alluded to. You provided a lot of great feedback and tidbits there as well that I hope everybody, you know, was catching, you know. But for the most part, with both of these, right? Because I tell people with the resume, it's not going to get you the job. The LinkedIn profile is not going to get you a job. You know, those things should get you to the interview. And then ultimately you have to execute once you get in the interview and be able to convey how well you've done those credentials that are listed on your LinkedIn profile and your resume. So definitely once you get the resume together, begin identifying your talking points so that you can begin practicing, you can be ready. I know we have a lot of people that are attending the National Black MBA Conference in Philly in a couple of weeks, and you know, we'll be interviewing for a lot of great opportunities. So make sure that you're practicing now, getting your stars together, your situation, task, action, results, and so that you can be ready and you have the full package together in terms of your professional presentation. So just keep those things in mind. So that pretty much sums it up for me. I've had fun today, Tricia. So I appreciate the invite once again, and it's been really, really great sharing with everybody.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. And you can put your information in the chat just so that everyone here has it. And I just want to thank you again for your expertise. You know, the goal that from when Jeremy and I first spoke is we want the jobs to come to you. We want the recruiters to seek you. Okay, you've applied. We know that that's not the best avenue for every person, but we want the recruiters we want to increase the likelihood that they're coming to you with the right role because they see you as a fit for what their hiring leaders are explaining to them as far as their needs. So this is that big first step, and it can be overwhelming. I mean, we talked about a lot of different techniques, and I can understand how, okay, I'm doing the job. Now I got to tell you how I'm doing the job, and then I got to, you know, show up for the job, you know, so I understand it's very overwhelming. So we provide resources like this. We're going to send the deck to follow up, and Jeremy's going to share his information in case you all want to take it any step further as far as contacting him directly. But we just want to thank you all so much for joining us today. I can talk about hiring and jobs and HR all day. So, you know, thank you for listening. If you have any questions, you're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Okay, before we leave, I just want to say thank you all for this meeting because I really liked it. You know, it talks about LinkedIn, about how we use it and how we make the profile picture well and make a proper resume, and that we have to recheck all the steps from step 1 to step 6. And I want to thank Jeremy Hardiman for all the explanation.
You're welcome.
You're very welcome.
And by the way, actually, I am working as an EA playtester, you know, Electronic Arts. Yeah, so I'm a playtester. And other than that, there's something a little crazy. I'm actually the one who gave the idea to Apple for the Face ID. I actually, at first, I gave it to them as Face ID mode, but they made it more simpler and made it Face ID to make it more simple.
That's really cool, man. Thank you for sharing.
And is it okay if you can send the link of what your guys recording, because I've noticed that you guys are recording. So, and like, which channel is it?
Yes, we're gonna email out. So anyone who registered,
is it okay if you can like send the link?
Yeah, we're going to send the link out for the presentation and with the recording. We should have the recording saved by sometime later on tonight, and I'll send that over to you by the end of the week. Just to answer Nina's question, she asked, can you research the HR team of a company you apply for and email directly? Yes, 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 and yes. So if you see a job for PMO director, look for PMO recruiter, PMO talent acquisition on that company site and see if anyone shows up talking about those types of roles. Have that requisition number handy and put that into your initial connection. My name is such and such. I applied for requisition number 210, bop, bop, bop. I would love to connect with you or the appropriate party about my interest in the role. Send. You have saved them so much time. You're active, you're interested, and you're engaged. And now I know how I can help you if I can. They have to admit, every recruiter is not going to respond back just based on how many messages they receive or what they're working on or their personal way to do their job. But I can tell you there are recruiters who are actually looking for candidates is because they don't have enough applicants there to meet the needs. So find those people talking about those roles and set up some automated searches to do that for you. But again, we're almost at time, so just email me directly and we can kind of continue the conversation on. But I did want to take this time to once again thank Jeremy, but also introduce to you our chapter president who can tell you more about the Grow with Google program and all the resources that they offer through National Black MBA in our chapter.
Let me hop back on video here. So thank you again, Tricia. Thank you, Jeremy. This was expert level information that you all got for free. Incredible insight. And as a hiring manager, I look for a lot of these things as well. So definitely take these tips that you got today and apply them. But very quickly, want to share Google or Grow with Google. This whole program is about connecting our members with resources that will help you grow in your careers. And part of that is that they have those career certificates out there through Google, as Muhammad was mentioning earlier at the top of the call. And we are going to be starting to promote some of those certificates, or really all of those certificates, specifically for our members. You will have scholarship opportunities, but as Tricia shared, there's other resources out there. There is an actual Grow with Google site on YouTube or page. So you can go just to YouTube and search Grow with Google, and you can see a lot of these presentations conducted by other people and really all of the resources that they have. And then we will share, as Tricia mentioned, we will share the link to this recording, and you'll get access to our DFW chapter YouTube channel, and you'll be able to see like the last recording and some other videos that we have out there as well. So definitely, again, thank you all for coming out tonight. It's great turnout, great engagement, and really, really good information that you received. So I think that's it for me. Any other words for you, Tricia?
Yes, not that there's a time limit to this, but I do want to go through your questions, but I did want to thank everyone. Demetrius will stop the recording soon. I'm going to stay in the room and answer as many questions that I can. If that's okay with you all.
Awesome.
All right, and I'll stay on for a few additional minutes too.
Thank you. Okay.